So I wanted to thank you all for coming to Common Press today. The Common Press is a gay, queer bookshop well known for kind of pushing the boundaries of sex and acceptance, and is really excited to have these amazing fetishists and just extraordinaires with us today. We have Anastasiia Fedorova. Did I say that right? I'm really sorry. Who is an amazing curator and researcher of all things fetishy and extraordinary, as I said. She's going to talk us through her amazing new book, Second Skin, and she is partnered tonight with Eva Oh, an award-winning dominatrix and also personality of her own that we all know from internet and movie fame.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please give a round of applause to our guest.
Thank you. It's so special to be here. Thank you for having us. It's amazing to have this event in a queer bookstore. Just because I think for me, I talk about it a lot, but like queerness is really important to me in what I write. And for me, it happened before getting into kink and BDSM properly. And it's the two things which I think can't really exist properly, one without the other. So please do support the bookshop, get some more queer books. I definitely will, apart from mine, get mine and then get some more. And I'll definitely get some before leaving. And I was thinking to start, I might read a little bit, just like a very short reading. I think I'm going to read from the dominatrix chapter, which is on the theme today. I just cracked this one, so whoever buys it, I'm sorry.
I think that makes it more expensive.
Yeah, I can sign it in a special way. The dominatrix is always present, but never in direct sight. She navigates grey areas, speaks of uncomfortable desires, and unearths shadow selves. She hints at much which is feared by society: motherly rejection, sexual humiliation, a woman's mocking love. As a result, she's often held at arm's length, assigned a place in low culture, and known only via a handful of reductive signifiers: thigh-high PVC boots, a corset, red lips, a tight leather catsuit, a skinny whip. She's on a phone booth sticker you see out of the corner of your eye, always in the field of vision, even if ignored. She promises the touch of the divine, the carnal, and the underworld, a pleasure beyond acceptable social frameworks and gender hierarchies. Her image is desirable and fetishized, but it conceals a presence which is feared. The trouble with archetypes is that they are just that. They are symbols, shortcuts, unable to capture the complexity of an erotic exchange. However, to some degree, the dominatrix is the archetype. There is a duality to her, both a well-known idea and a human experience, a fantasy and a lived reality, a performance and an authentic way of being. And to further complicate matters, those opposites are not neatly divided. They are easily confused, they merge along the edges and often inform one another. This is perhaps the ultimate power of the dominatrix. She is in control of the boundary between fantasy and reality. The dominatrix offers a subversion of traditional social hierarchy. She is a fantasy, but also a trespasser of the gender boundaries, wandering beyond the woman's prescribed place in sexual expression. The fact that the dominatrix has a clear, intimidating iconography helps to isolate the notion of erotic power in women's hands and to keep it within the boundaries of performance enabled by lever and whips. Within the patriarchal logic, women do not find pleasure in taking control, unless for a perverted motivation. But erotic power exchange exists covertly in our surroundings. The fantasies of it lurk in mundane settings, in private and public spaces, on wipe-clean gym machines, in offices, when cleaning the house. Stories of sex, gender, and power don't always have to rely on the fetish trope. The character of Yasmin in the Bank and drama industry, for instance, steps into her power in the formal clothes she wears on the trading floor. She seems to stand a little taller, while sensing a weakness to exploit. Or take Jerry in Succession, verbally humiliating Roman through a bathroom door, almost surprising herself that she's going for it. In both instances, there's already a complex entanglement of power relations between the people involved, but also a sense of intimacy achieved through venturing into the riskier side of sexuality. There is no bondage, no whips, only the more subtle expression of power achieved through a particular tone of voice, a promise or denial. This power exchange is ubiquitous and no less intoxicating than the one in the dungeon. In fact, the stakes are higher. In the dungeon, consent and boundaries are always negotiated, while in the day-to-day, the boundaries can blur. Thank you. I interviewed Eva for the dominatrix chapter alongside other very interesting women working as dominatrixes. And I can say actually that this chapter was one of the hardest for me to write because I was really interested in interviewing people for it and getting people's perspectives. And I quickly became very frustrated that every person obviously has their own perspective on it. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized that I wouldn't be able to actually kind of create a portrayal as complex as I would like to. But I sincerely gave it a try. So
a whole other book just on the dominatrix then?
Oh, I would love. Absolutely.
Was there anything that was a commonality?
It's really hard to tell. I'm not sure. I guess we talked a lot about the social stigma versus power and talked about money versus power. That was quite a common one.
And also, I think you mentioned something about the tone of voice. There was something about the voice that was always a constant in session space. From a dom. Was it primarily from a dom?
Yeah, I did, because I think I was interested in kind of looking also beyond the visual, as in the extract I just read, about how the archetype is kind of it is not all there is. There's also the invisible power, which is interesting. But I'm just curious, actually, what you thought of the chapter when you read it. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Answering a question. Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of the book in general. I don't know how many of you have read it yet, but I feel like it's going to be what I will be recommending to anybody who is interested in finding out what kink is, because not only does it take you through the possibilities, the chapter on the dominatrix, the chapter on latex, the chapter on leather, but it kind of really shows you the spirit of how those things can live inside of people. And I think that applied deeply to the dominatrix as well. We get this definition, which I think is what you sort of read out, this approach, but also you managed to capture like the spirit of each of us and kind of like really give people a picture of what that could live within themselves as well. So I think that I was very happy about the description of my apartment. You made it sound very nice. I'm not there anymore. It's a bit sad, but I loved the whole thing in general. It really, we're very close as friends, and we often just live our lives and forget. Well, I do. Obviously not you, because you got to write a whole book about it, but I just forget how deep our reality is. And I think that to see that in the book was it was a reminder of how special a way that we get to experience our lives. I think that sometimes I forget because we're just hustling, making it work. Yeah. So did that describe what I thought about it?
That's great. I kind of feel like I'm blushing a little bit.
Yeah. I liked seeing all of my friends really beautifully represented. And also it was interesting to realize how we have all the same friends. Yeah. How close we are.
Yeah, I
in each
felt,
other's pockets.
Yeah. I thought of the book a little bit as a snapshot of the community after I've written it, which I think what makes it really special to me. And maybe I can talk a little bit about how it came about generally. So I am like a post-pandemic kinkster, which I think is probably true for a lot of people, because the pandemic was that strange time when we all spend a lot of time indoors with ourselves, and I think a lot of people use this time to reconsider their sexuality, the idea of gender, the idea of kind of how to live a fulfilling life. And for me, the big part of it was not just embracing kink and fetish, but because I think it was always like a core part of my sexuality, so it wasn't anything new, but it was actually this idea of I really want to be more open about it than I am. And as someone who works in culture, I feel like I have a privilege to have a space or create a space to talk about it openly, but also this kind of internal pressure of being like, I have to use my identity, or I can use my identity as something I work with. So somewhere at the kind of intersection of both, I decided to start like publicly writing about kink and fetish, and also using some of the research I did when I was bored out of my mind in my bedroom, which was reading a lot of Patrick Califia and Leverdyke literature from 1990s and 2000s, like the comment power anthologies. So I basically used all that to start writing about it, and
That's how we met, right?
yeah, and that's how we met, because
I
you
remember.
liked my writing on Instagram, and
Oh,
I
it
was like,
Instagram.
yeah.
Did I reach out?
I think so.
Yeah, because I was coming to London. I was moving here, so.
Yeah, and then we went to the for a drink, and that was really inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think my journey to fetish, because I think like my initial interest was more linked to BDSM, but my journey to fetish, I think, was the merging of my work and my previous work as like a culture writer and like fashion writer as well. So with my interest in kink, so I basically found a ground which would allow me to use some of the knowledge and skills which I had from working with art, design, and fashion, and then channel that to tell the story of kink cultures, fetish cultures, and also the community. So interviewing people, and I think I also potentially I've just used it as an excuse to meet more people, which is it's always great for. But yeah, but how maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of what fetish is and what kind of role it can play in life. So how did you discover fetish?
How did I discover fetish? I didn't have any room for understanding what it was. Maybe about 15 years ago. It wasn't part of conversations around me. People were not openly identifying. It was more like whispers of what things might feel like rather than any tangible reality. And people would make jokes about my personality more than anything, that I was quite assertive or aggressive, perhaps, that I asked for what I wanted, which I think as a femme-presenting person was not really the way that things were. And so they used the word dominatrix as a joke. And I Googled it and found a dungeon and went in for an interview because I was in between jobs and thought I needed to try something that could be a little bit more cash in hand. And that sort of just stuck. Yeah. I just thought it would be something I would try. But even on the first day, in my first session, I realized I had never had a space to experience those emotions or to feel accepted and fulfilled for the way that I wanted to be. And so it was more that my identity or my personality found a space. And then the waves of my obsessions of fetishes and kinks kind of came after. That was allowed, I think. It allowed me space to finally sink into the perversion and the curiosities. Yeah. But first it came through a personality thing.
What was your first fetish or like first few?
I think the one that was a huge wave was maybe there's two. The one I didn't notice as much because it was an emotional one. I love fear.
Is fear fetish? Like that is very interesting. I love that direction of a conversation.
I love to feel a fear, not in me, but coming at me because of me. Yeah, I don't want it to be like overarchingly like permanent, but just a temporary exchange. That was one thing, but I didn't notice that. It was just part of the exchange. Again, it's a very temporal thing. People don't tell you that it's a fetish even now. We like joke about what do we call that? And then the second one that was very obvious was latex. And getting in my catsuit for the first time. It was just like, okay, this is a problem. Yeah. The constriction. It was not, there's nothing like it. And yeah.
Fear and latex.
Fear and latex. Your next book. I'm just want you to keep writing.
I think latex is a very interesting example because I think for me that was probably the material which changed my understanding of what fetish is, because it's that distinction of, I write about it in the book a little bit about buying lawn latex gloves and trying them on and realizing that it's something completely different to wearing anything else, and it just sits in a completely different category, and kind of wearing it just for how it looks is an incomplete experience of sorts. So for me, I think it was the same.
Was that with the gloves already, or? For me, it took a whole catsuit because I had pieces, I had like skirts, and it took me a few years to actually be like, all right, I'll get into this catsuit. And then that was when I realized.
Well, in the beginning, you were like, oh, this is just uncomfortable.
I didn't think it was uncomfortable. I just thought, oh, this is quite nice, fascinating, looks interesting. But it's the feeling of being trapped. that pushed me over the edge, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting also, I think, those things are quite difficult to describe on an individual level. And I think everyone actually, on a sensory level, has a different
I'm sure.
attitude to them. So when I was writing, I always tried to forget what the things look like. What does it look like to wear a catsuit? And instead be like, I was trying to imagine that I don't remember what my body looks like, and just to think how it feels. Because I think quite often you probably get these questions too. Like when you wear latex, everybody comes up to you and goes like, "Aren't you hot in this? Like, is it boiling in that?" And I'm like, it's complicated. It is, but also it's a lot of other things. So I think latex is definitely was a very meaningful material for me. But I do love that you called fear a fetish, because it's quite different to the definition of fetish, which I guess is the mainstream definition, which is it's let's say an erotic interest in an object, or like an erotic desire for an object of sorts. And I think in the book, so I write about, of course, latex and leather, but I also write about things which are a bit more kind of not as straightforward, and they're more in the mind rather than in the realm of objects per se. So I write about the animalistic and like playing with the monstrous. And how that relates to examples like puppy play community, and but also the whole idea of like monstrous as queer and recreating yourself as something which is like ugly or feared or potentially unpleasant, and then finding beauty in that, or finding some kind of alternative system of value in that, which can allow you to like rework a lot of rejection and internalize shame, and also just think of what could it be like not to feel human for a little bit in a
transformation.
Yeah, so like the transformational drive. So that was a really big topic, which I think really goes beyond that idea of fetish, which I think can be quite reductive usually.
I don't know if I've experienced transformation or if I would really say it as transformation. I think for me, it's maybe given me avenues to lean into things that we're normally taught to feel as discomfort. Yeah, so maybe it's leaning into, I guess, the sadism of enjoying fear, you know, leaning into the sense of constriction on my own terms in latex and the visual representation of that and enjoying the objectification of it also. I guess these things that we're taught not to entertain because of this or whatever reason, and it's just, I guess, facilitated ways of leaning into my human experience in corners that are often shied away from. Yeah, so yes, transformation, I guess it could also be seen that way, but it's just facilitators for thought, perhaps, and living, maybe is how I sort of see fetish, as well as it's just fun and hot and things like that. Yeah.
I think it's also a way of being very nerdy about sex.
Yes.
Which is like, let's make it all about the gear and the equipment and the things and the order in which we do things.
Yeah, the shining, the cleaning, the obsession.
Yeah, the ritualistic element of it, I think, is just really helps to take sex away from like a pre-designed cultural script, which I think is very familiar to queer people generally, because all our like kind of adolescence, we see this information about sex, which is like, this is how you have sex, and this is like heterosexual sex, and this is the only way you do it, and all the films are about that, and all the books are about that, and then you get to the point when like, I don't want that, or like I don't feel fulfilled by that at all.
I'm bored.
I'm bored by it. What do I do to reinvent it? So I think, to me, reinventing it from the queer point of view was definitely the first step, like before I kind of got into kink, because that already just introduced me to the fact that it's very fluid and changing, and just our sexuality doesn't stay the same during our lifetime. And it just always changes and evolves, and it changes and evolves when you meet people and you learn things from them. So I think that was definitely a big factor.
Has there been anything in the process of the book that you felt you had to pick up on more? Or that you did?
Writing about foot fetish was very interesting, because it's not something I kind of knew. I didn't really know much about it before, and I don't think, I mean, it's a question whether I have foot fetish or not. I'm not sure, but somehow in my mind I was like, even if I do, it's not enough. Mine is not a good enough fetish mind, so I have to talk to other people. Okay. Not as if not good enough, but I was like, there's definitely things about it I don't know, which I would like to learn from other people. So I did like, I think 6 or 7 anonymous interviews with people when they just talked to me a little bit about what they find interesting about feet. Do they think that calling it a fetish is the right word? Because obviously a foot is more of a body part, so a lot of people argue whether it could be called fetish or it should be called a kink. So I asked people about that. So that was a really interesting one.
Did it inform your foot fetish practice?
Yeah, I think so. I think the more you think of something, the hotter it becomes. I think if you have to spend like days and days thinking about it, I think inevitably after a while I was like, you know what? Yeah.
It into something hotter.
I was like, this socks, this look great.
Okay. I did like the sock descriptions. They were very good.
I love socks. That's what I realized. I just love sports socks. I'm a huge like white sports sock fetishist.
I remember I first walked into like a German fetish store maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, somewhere in Berlin, and they were selling sports socks. And I was so confused. I was like, what is that doing here? Like next to all this rubber. And now I understand.
Fetish has to be uncomfortable. Why is this here? A comfortable thing? No.
Yeah. Maybe it's misplaced, but no, there's a place for everything, apparently.
Yeah, so that one was an interesting one. But then I had a very interesting experience with writing a chapter about cars, which I think it's quite different maybe to what a lot of people expect to find in the book, because it's I feel like it talks about fetish in a bit of a different way, because I talk a bit about my childhood memories of like growing up around cars and my family being obsessed with cars and like going for rides with my family, and how that for me is a very like safe, nostalgic space. But how that somehow informed my certain amount of like erotic attraction I have to cars, and how it like excites me as imagery, as like just a piece of culture. And I've written as well about, of course, like some cultural things there, like J.G. Ballard's Crash, and the film adaptation of that, Titan as well, as a really good film which has some good car elements in it. But also I wrote about cars as sort of an acceptable vanilla fetish, which also channels masculinity and a very like traditional old school masculinity, which is relates to like petrol and kind of that very 20th century idea of what a success looks like and what like beauty looks like. And I also interviewed two great trans masculine artists who work with cars, and both work with cars but in quite a different way. Romeo Gatt and Theo Alriona. So they both kind of looked at the car as something you can remake and augment, and in the same way you can augment your body, and you can like rethink of how it exists, and like what does gender and gender stereotypes mean, and how you can work with them. So basically after writing that, it really made me look quite critically on my own attraction to cars as this like fetishized object which is expensive and slick, and but also it's emblematic of a certain way our society is built, and our economy is built, and how commodities are very important to us. And so part of me was like, you know what, I'm fine. I don't really need this in my life. I don't really want. I can acknowledge that I like this, but I don't really need to like change my life for it or strive for it from the monetary perspective.
Okay.
So I think it really taught me a bit about like more critical relationship to consumerism, definitely.
Okay, so we lean into socks and we lean away out of cars, apparently. But when you were thinking of writing these headers and you included cars, for example, was there anything that you've left out?
In the original proposal, I had a chapter about food. So like our relationship with food, and how that is a very complicated, like a culturally complicated thing, and how it's can be part of our sexuality, how for some people it is part of their sexuality. But then I realized that it's a little bit different to everything else, and perhaps I didn't have a personal relationship to it on the same level. I kind of felt like I couldn't really do it justice in the same way I could with other things.
Okay, I mean, there's the feeding.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
There's a lot of things which are very interesting, and I think it overlaps with internet culture in very interesting ways, and how, for example, a lot of people watch like other people eating while, but also like while they eat dinner themselves. Okay. So that's quite a popular one.
Okay.
So you kind of, because you don't want to eat alone, you eat with another person, which is not necessarily sexual, I guess, but I think it's just an interesting, just an interesting one. So that didn't make it in the end. I wish that I could. I think if I did something differently, I would probably. Originally, actually, a chapter on trainers and a chapter on feet were two different chapters, but then that didn't happen. I don't remember why, but I think if I did something differently, I would probably separate like footwear from feet and do two different chapters, for sure. Because I think even thinking of like a certain brand of high heels, like Louboutins, or
very distinct.
That is a very distinct fetish, and there's so much like amazing cultural imagery which exists, which I wish I got into more. But that's maybe something for the future.
Yes. Well, thank you for adding it to our lives and our history. And I will be recommending it to everybody. I kind of feel like maybe that's our time.
Oh, we have more time.
We have time for questions.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or is there anything left that you wanted to mention?
I'm just thinking whether I can ask you something interesting before we
Buy the book.
start.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
I don't know. Actually, maybe. So, your understanding of fetish as something which other people have and something you have, has it changed over your career? What have you learned about it?
Well, I came in clueless, which is actually probably a pretty good place to start. No preconception, not really, not too many preconceptions, a sense of openness and adventurousness and willingness. And I was really lucky to be surrounded by 20, 25 veterans, you know, when I first started in the dungeon. So I just open ears, open heart, and took it all in for better or worse. So like a sponge, I just understood that everything came in at all sorts of different angles and also different ways, and the same person might not be the same person in the next hour. So I think that it's maybe similar in that I understand, like what you were saying, that things can shift and move, but also can be incredibly particular and heavy, heavy fetishes with this very singular-minded scene that they're just going to be living for the rest of their lives. So we have that also, that anomaly. But I think that for example, when I first started, there were some things that I didn't want to engage in. And I think just over time, easing into these more uncomfortable parts of myself enables me to interact with them. So I used to not be okay with age play, for example, but now I'm quite comfortable thinking about the creativity that can be around that and what my discomfort was. So maybe I still have an openness and a readiness to hearing a perspective, which has served me well, but my steps towards reaching into further parts of myself has allowed me even greater access to myself. So maybe it's not so much what has fetish, how has that sort of shifted, rather than how much more comfortable have I gotten to all the things that are just already there, I think.
Are there people who like only ask for one thing?
Oh yeah.
Just one thing and nothing else?
Oh yeah.
Time after time?
There's a script. I have this one person who I see in Sydney still, seen them for years because I can carry out that script. And it's the same script, maybe slight variation, a slight change of a bit of jewelry or something that maybe they saw, you know? And so that they added it, change to the thing that's lasted for 10 years now. So,
I love that. That's incredible as an idea.
It's a fixation, yeah. But not many people can carry it out for them, which can leave long gaps of, I guess, quiet also.
It was interesting that I got asked a couple of times. Someone was like, are there fetishes which like you didn't include in the book, which maybe you felt like were too much or something? And I'm like, yeah, definitely. Of course, like the stuff which, because I think we just forget, especially now when the kink culture is, I think it exists in the public eye a bit more as an aesthetic. It's existed as an aesthetic, of course, for a long time in film and music videos and like books, art books. But because now it also exists on social media, I think it's an interesting one that it's more visible, but it's only certain parts of it which are visible. And certain dynamics, like you mentioned, age play, like the certain dynamics and ideas and scenarios, they just like, and they probably not going to be understood by a person who's not familiar.
But you explain everything very well. You should try.
I should try. Maybe it's the next one. So, I mean, I'm naturally drawn to things which are more difficult, which I think I would like to eventually write about, because I haven't written, and I think about BDSM and power dynamics as much as I would like to. So that is something I'm really interested in. And yeah, but because I mean, all of you have seen like the Sabrina Carpenter scandal, so people have really low threshold for anything which feels disturbing on the lightest level. And I think it's an interesting culture of, I don't want to call it sex negativity, but it's a certain brand of like
Reactivity.
sex reactivity. Or like it's just a certain blend of, I don't know, it's really hard to tell what it is, but it's a certain degree of maybe conservatism, or maybe that idea that everything has to be palatable for me, and if something disturbs me, it's not okay morally, which is like, it's just kind of a really strange idea to me, not understanding that other people might have a different take on this, and it's fine. Especially when it comes to like people's personal preferences of how they are depicted or what they engage with in terms of how their sexuality is expressed. So yeah, I think it's an interesting idea about how things are visible but also not, and how much of it is still hidden and has to be hidden, or otherwise it's just very stigmatized.
Shall we go to questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing everything.
Thank you.
When we're recording, I can.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh.
Nice. Thank you so much. I've really been enjoying reading the book so far. I've got a lot of culture to go through. Sort of following on from the last point, Sabrina Carpenter and acceptability. So I've kind of come from a strange thing of growing up assuming everyone was kink in their sexuality, and then realizing that wasn't the case. I can't remember when I started to realize, but I think there's a part of me that still doesn't quite believe that. Can you relate to that at all, or do you happen to the opposite, and to being almost confronted by or surprised by some of these things? I mean, I keep being surprised by things too, and kind of openness to feeling aroused by things other people are aroused by, but there's this assumption I still have that everyone has it in them, and maybe they do, but maybe some people are just very confronted by it. But do you remember? Do you share that experience at all?
That's such an interesting question, because it's that thing when how most of straight people assume that everyone's straight, and then when you go to the other end, you're like, everyone's gay. Like, surely, like the other thing it's not a thing, right? You just haven't realized it yet, right?
Kind of, why wouldn't you? That's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. So because I grew up in quite like conservative environment when it came to sex. So I think like sexual imagery and like TV programs were kind of around, but like in my family nobody ever talked about sex, and at school nobody talked about sex. It just wasn't a thing which existed. So in my mind there was like the fantasy world and the sex you have with people. So like the fantasy stuff was like anything goes, but the sex you have with people was just like the very straightforward, like kind of conservative idea of what sex is. And yeah, I wouldn't say, I think I had probably the opposite experience of being, am I the only person who's into this? Which is obviously not the case, but sometimes you feel so isolated in that you're like, I can't bear like even talking to another human being about what I like, because it seems like something's wrong with me, and like I have these ideas which are clearly kind of a bit dark, and I don't know how to bring them up, which is another reason why I was interested in like talking about the dark aspects of some of this, because there is, I talked about it before, but there is like the whole like sex as wellness discourse, which has its uses, and I think it's good, and it's like sex positivity is also great, but it just leaves out some of the, I think, kink practices and like some other parts of our sexuality, which like, they can be about wellness, but they're also not just about that. They sometimes like quite, can be quite dark and can come from places which are quite complicated. So I think just kind of live in place with complexity is great. But yeah, I mean, I came out like pretty late with all of that. Like I came out as queer at like 29, and then I came out about kink at 31. So it was like a whole life without that. And so yeah, I'm really glad I made this decision. But it literally was like my whole adult life. I was like, yeah, it's just what I look at here, but nobody knows about that.
Can I?
Yeah.
So the question is kind of like, do I think everyone is kinky? Right? And I guess...
Or did you have a
I'd had no clue. I've been doing all of this for about 15 years. I didn't think about that question. I didn't think I was kinky, even though I was. Yes, and the thing is, when you're a dominatrix, which I don't know if everyone knows, I'm a dominatrix. Anyway, and so whenever you go to random dinner parties or whatever, you meet all sorts of people. I have a lot of different types of people that I have hung out with. My background is really random. And when people see or hear that you're part of the sex industry, it's quite inappropriate, but they all like just tell you their deepest, darkest secrets immediately. And pretty much everybody will have something like to say. Pretty much everybody. Occasionally you kind of meet this person who doesn't really like, you know, what you see is kind of what you get. It's very like, it is what it is, and there's maybe not so much like that they're reaching into, and they probably don't have very much that they're compulsively desiring, you know, it's every now and then, but that's very few in comparison to the people who are like, oh, I must tell you this thing. So that's my answer?
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely not everyone is into BDSM, that's for sure. But like, I think if we draw like a broader circle what kink is, I think that there's definitely, everybody has something. Because there's this interesting idea I encountered recently that, so what shapes our sexuality to a degree is how forbidden it is when we are told about it. Well, it's like classic psychoanalysis thing, right? How like when our parents talk to us about it and they're like all awkward and they're sweating and I don't know what to do, like that makes us excited about it even more, and that forms some of the sexuality we end up having.
That's what it is. It's like I thought I was weird, and at the same time I thought, God, maybe everyone's a bit weird. So yeah.
Everyone is. Yeah. We all are perverts here, so I assume.
Yeah. We have one question over here.
Does it reach? Okay.
Yeah, where's the other? There we go.
I feel like this is kind of in line with what we were talking about. Because sometimes I think about like, oh my God, hold on. How do I want to say? If a lot of our like kinks and fetishes kind of like hinge on like formative experiences or like the taboo and all these things, sometimes I think about like what would a world be like if many of the things that are considered taboo or risque or whatever, like, you know, weren't around and we were kind of all in a free-for-all, like what what would that world look like? You know what I mean? Like, would your book exist in this world? Like, what would be the conversations we're having? Yeah.
Do you see that as a utopic vision or not?
Do I see it as a utopic vision? Would we even know that we are in a utopia in that scenario?
I think we both have answers to this, no, compared to where we come from.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that you don't have to worry about that in our lifetime. Sorry. But
I mean, it's fun over here.
yeah. So I come from a Muslim country, and I'm always very scared when I go back, and I dress completely differently. I present very differently. I have a different, everything's different. And I moved to London primarily because I never felt more free and surrounded by people who I could have a conversation with, basically, that I actually wanted to have. And so for me, I guess, and there's still a lot to be gained in a place like London. And there's still centers like this bookstore that we need to gather in, that need to exist. And so I think that we're very far away from your utopic vision yeah, or that happening. I think there's just something, there's a lot for us to be able to have a space where there is no more taboo. But I guess it's better to have strains of taboo that sort of drive creative thought and critical engagement with what's internal, the way that we're all interacting, without the fear of death, persecution, walking down the street. So I guess further away from that and into being able to have the book and to think about it and for somebody to tell us we're wrong and for us to have a dialogue, I think is probably a nice place to be.
I think, so it's an interesting question about, I was thinking a lot about how foundational some of the like fetishes or kinks might be, because I feel like some of the stuff goes like so deep that it's hard to imagine what do you need to undo so the tension goes away, because like family relationships is a big one, right? So like whoever our carers are, it's like there's always rejection and a certain amount of rejection and love and needs which are not met maybe, and I think that goes into like psychology territory, but I think that creates a lot of that. And then there's a few things which are quite sensory, which I think bondage is a good example, or I think to a degree even latex and rubber as well, because that doesn't necessarily have to do with
Trauma.
Yeah, or with like any story or identity. It's just like a thing which feels good for some reason. So I think those things, I can't imagine that, like, how, in which world they wouldn't exist. But I feel like, things which are more like scenario based, which are around like hierarchies of like at work or but those are, or like the based on clothes which we wear in certain contexts. Because of course it's like it goes very deep into like the cultural like Catholic kink and all that. It's like so heavily based on what we have that it's easy to imagine in which world that wouldn't exist, or why it doesn't do for anything for people mostly who have not grown up around that, or like even how language determines our sexuality to a degree in terms of what kind of words are hot for us or not hot for us. And I think that's, again, is a very interesting topic which I didn't get too much in, but I think as people who are bilingual probably relate to the fact that in your second language, like talking about sex is kind of easier because it goes not as far back, and therefore is not as as much shame as there is with your native language, for example. So there's just so much to unpack.
Nice to dream.
Yeah, thank you. I never like had a desire to be a therapist in my life before writing this, probably, or like just knowing more about psychology, because I looked a little bit in psychology mostly from my absolute disdain for the Freudian definitions of fetishism, which are very, very, very male, and they're very like, women don't have fetishes. It's all about the penis. Everything represents a penis. The penis, a high-heeled shoe, a penis, a corset, a penis. What else? Everything it's all that, basically, nothing else. And that's the whole, that whole piece of writing, which just really angered me at some point, which was one of the starting points where I wanted to write this. Especially the idea that fetish is a male practice and like women can't possibly have fetishes. But then actually around the time when I was finishing the book, I realized that there's a lot of stuff in psychoanalysis, which of course is a bit better than that, and it does give a more complex it creates a bit more complex understanding of that. So I'll definitely read some more of that now that I have time.
Next career choice. Yeah.
So
I think we're good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe
We've
one
got-
one
yeah,
more.
we've got time
Who
for
wants
both.
to fight for it?
I'd be happy to answer that. Did you have a question?
I mean, I'm sure we can do both. It's like,
Do it privately later.
yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to ask more about. Well, you already talked, I guess, about like the sort of intersection between like kink spaces and queer spaces. Obviously, like this bookshop, and how much those two interact, and about I think about what the sort of mainstream society has to learn from all this. I mean, obviously, as you said, not everyone is kinky or not everyone is going to be, but I think there's certainly a lot that vanilla society could learn from queer and kinky people, and about how society could be better if they did. So yeah, I don't know what the question is there, but
Closing statement.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I of course, like there's consent culture and like just open communication about what you enjoy and talking about it as much as possible. Because I find that when I do interviews about the book, at some point, especially if it's like a mainstream media kind of thing, or maybe people who are a bit outside of the community, I feel like I have to catch myself at some point and be like, just a disclaimer, it's two consenting adults and everyone's doing it after discussing it, and it's all good. So I think that's a big one. And then when it comes to the intersection of the queer and kink spaces, I mean, that's an interesting question. I feel like, because like I have always found like kink and fetish community, or however we call this assemblage of people, which I kind of raise in the book about like what does community mean in a time when this word is losing its meaning, and what do we need to do to make it a community. It's just basically sometimes it brings together people who all have different political stances, social stances, income, and so on. So you end up in the room with people when you like, do we share enough to even like be that open with each other, or like where does this openness lie? Like yeah, we can have sex with each other. Does that make us like understand each other better? Would we politically be on the same page at all? So I think in that way, I feel like queer spaces have a bit more of a common ground. Yeah, but I feel like still it's like, especially, I think as to me, I feel like trans rights are like a priority more than any other. And like, it's the nice thing to see that I feel like in both of these spaces, it's something which is supported and like talked about. So I feel like, yeah, to me, I feel like if this could be spaces where there is more mutual care as opposed to kind of just like physically being in spaces is really important, but I think like mutual care and supporting kind of like the people who are less privileged and more marginalized is really important, definitely. But that's like, yeah, it's like there's always like theory and there's practice and there's fun and there's other things, and yeah, it's quite difficult to say where one ends and one starts, especially again as a lot of this is very nightlife based, and that's, I think, a lot of people are feeling like it's a bit of an issue because it's not necessarily always good for people who are sober or for people who are neurodivergent, or people who like have different physical abilities with staying up all night in noisy spaces. So I feel like a lot of people want to connect on a more meaningful level, and it's just would be interesting to see. And I think some of the spaces already do exist, but would be interesting to see what happens when that hopefully like expands a bit more.
Mm-mm. Yes. Amazing. Thank you.
Is this it? Or shall we do?
We'll do that then. One more? One more? Okay.
Okay.
Hi. I'm really enjoying reading the book, and something that really comes through is the amount of care with which you write about these subjects that can be really deeply personal for a lot of readers and perhaps for you as well. And I just wanted to ask, what were the sort of, how did you approach writing on this theme, and also were there particular challenges to that, and how to write about it sensitively and with so much care as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like people ask me a lot about whether it was hard to like write about myself and what I feel and what I like, and that I think wasn't as difficult, partly because my family can't read in English, so that was fine. But I think, or is if they can, but they can't, and it's quite unlikely they're gonna, because they live in a different country, so it's unlikely that they're gonna come across it randomly unless I actually show it to them. But I think I don't know. I really worried about like portraying other people's desires and ideas, and the way people live, and even like describing people is quite challenging, especially when you're close to them, or they're your friends maybe, or you just want to do justice to what they stand for. So I guess I did a lot of. I definitely like showed everyone everything before it got published and all that, but. In like sex scenes, I tried to like focus on kind of the inner perspective rather than kind of just describing what's happening, which hopefully helped. But yeah, I tried to like get everyone's consent around like what they feel really good about it representing them. That was the key thing. But yeah, and the care aspect, I don't know, I just feel really special about all the people I met. And to a degree, I think the people I met actually shaped the book, as opposed to like, it's not like, I did have some semblance of an idea, but I think a lot of it was actually inspired by people. So then I didn't have to write them into the narrative. I just like, it's more the narrative shape itself around them. So that meant that, and also like not going in with kind of a preconceived idea of what people are going to say, because I think that's like from working in media, that's like a classic thing, kind of approach people sometimes have. They're like, oh, I'm writing about this, and I have a feeling this person is going to say that, so I'm going to just leave some space here for their comment. And I just try to be like, just no expectations. And sometimes people, I did maybe have a subconscious expectation about what they're going to say, but they would say something completely different, and I'd be like, when you go like, is this important to you? And they're like, no, actually it's not. And I was like, fine, I would have to rethink this part. Yeah, when you have a feeling like you know what a person, like what is meaningful and how they present and what it means. And they're like, actually, no, I don't really care. Like, fair enough. Yeah, so I think just being kind of playful with it is the key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.